You're listening to Beyond Wellness Radio, bringing you the cutting edge in health, biohacking, and sports performance. Stay up to date and listen anywhere and anytime on your computer, tablet, or smartphone by subscribing on iTunes. Catch your host, Dr. Justin Marchegiani, as he answers your burning health questions as well as interviews from world-renowned guest experts. For more Beyond Wellness Radio, go to beyondwellnessradio.com.
Hey there, it's Dr. Justin Marchegiani. Welcome to Beyond Wellness Radio. Feel free and head over to beyondwellnessradio.com where you can access our full podcast transcriptions. While you're there, you can also sign up for our thyroid and female hormone video series. This series goes into the root cause of why your hormones are out of balance. While you're there, you can also schedule a functional medicine consult with Dr. Justin, myself, where we'll dig deeper into the root cause of your health challenges. Feel free and think of sharing this podcast with at least one person. This podcast grows by people sharing it. Sharing is caring. If you can think of one person that can benefit from this information, please feel free and share it. If you're enjoying the podcast, make sure you subscribe on iTunes. You can also click below the video or podcast where you'll see the iTunes review button and leave us a review. You can also sign up for the newsletter at beyondwellnessradio.com where you'll get updates before anyone else. Thank you so much and enjoy the show. Evan Brand, it's Dr. Justin here. What's going on, man?
Howdy. It's going great. Drinking some vitamin C to fuel my adrenals for this podcast.
I almost thought you'd be drinking matcha tea.
I'm actually running out. I'm getting close to running out. I've been sending out some invites to different companies to send me some samples so I can find one to carry, but I don't have those in the mail yet.
Very cool. Well, today we are in overdrive. We just did an awesome podcast on Tom Brady's diet and lifestyle secrets. So if you haven't listened to that, check that out. We're going 2 in a row today. We're cooking with fire. So today we're going to be talking about some functional medicine lab testing, kind of differentiating the conventional lab testing from the functional testing. I get these questions a lot from my patients. You do as well. So we're going to kind of get to the bottom of it here today.
Yeah. So I had a guy last week, and he was so confused and conflicted on how he could go to his endocrinologist and get a perfect bill of health. He gets his cortisol measure done via blood, and he is perfect, maybe even high. He may have even appeared high on that blood test, so he thinks high cortisol is the problem, or maybe that he doesn't have that much of a problem at all. But then when we run the functional test for salivary adrenal hormones for cortisol, he's low all day, and his output, I believe his cortisol sum was 7 units, which is just a fraction of where it should be. And he was like, oh my God, this doesn't make sense. My blood said I was fine. And that's it. That's a very common thing that you and I both experience is people get these blood tests and they get the perfect bill of health, come back next year for your blood work, and you'll be just fine. And that's a very poor way to keep track of your health.
Absolutely. So this person more than likely went to their endocrinologist, and first things first, right? Endocrinologists are not these gods about hormones, right? They aren't. Endocrinologists are really good and awesome at treating endocrine diseases, right? We're talking severe diseases, especially tumors, especially hyperthyroid conditions. They're good at picking it up and detecting it. Now, we can argue about, pituitary issues too, right? We can argue about maybe their treatments aren't the most effective. A lot of times, it's going to involve, especially with the thyroid, cutting the gland out or destroying it with radioactive iodine, etc. And again, a lot of the other conditions, it's typically, let's say they find a tumor on the genitals or in the testicles, they remove the testicle, great, you're on hormones now for life. The question is, what if we have a functional imbalance? That's the issue, right? What if we have a functional imbalance? Or what if we're not diabetic, but we're kind of in between, we're pre-diabetes, right? A lot of endocrinologists diagnose diabetes too, right? But they're just giving them glucophage, metformin. Maybe if they progress long enough, they're giving them insulin, right? Whether it's long-acting or short-acting insulin to cover up all the sugar in their bloodstream. So these docs, they're just kind of managing diseases. They're doing a good job when it comes to certain things like pulling out a thyroid during maybe Graves' disease to kind of avoid a thyroid storm. They're trying to, prevent these rare things. But we want to pop in here and use functional medicine, because functional medicine, one, it's very conservative, it's more cost effective. And a lot of times when it comes to your thyroid, we're going to be able to keep your thyroid gland, especially if you're able to make diet and supplement changes. When it comes to diabetes, we can almost reverse diabetes by just changing our diet, by giving nutrients to help make our body more sensitive to blood sugar. So when you look at endocrinology, from a functional perspective, we're doing different things. It's a different perspective, right? So we just got to know what we're looking at. When you go see a functional medicine doctor that's utilizing functional endocrinology, we're looking at functional imbalances that may lead up to disease or pathology, right? Pathology is the realm of the endocrinologist, MD. The functional doctor, they're going to be in that functional range. And that's where most people lie. And most people that go to the doctor come back home after being told they're fine, it's all in their head, or, hey, here's this antidepressant, or, hey, you got this hormone issue, here's a birth control pill. Those are the people that are going to do really well seeing a functional medicine doctor or nutritionist.
Yeah, perfect way to start that thing, because many people they'll send over their blood work to us and we'll look at it and we'll see things. I mean, we'll look at blood chemistry, and that's helpful because you can get some good measures, HSCRP or inflammation, and vitamin D status is helpful to check in your blood and things like that. But generally speaking, most of these measures are just kind of giving you a false sense of I guess not a false sense of hope, but maybe a false sense of health. I mean, a lot of these markers, your body is going to go through incredible things to make sure that, say, your sodium and your potassium and your magnesium levels, most of those times, those numbers are not going to change unless there's a severe issue. And you really don't have the same sensitivity, is basically what you were kind of alluding to, is what we're looking for. Very sensitive, very small fractions of hormones and things like that compared to the bigger picture that doesn't really provide as much info.
Yeah, and all functional issues or functional symptoms, meaning I'm tired, but I can still get up and go to work, that's different than Addison's disease, where your adrenals are totally exhausted. That's where the endocrinologist focuses on. And again, it's like black and white. If you're not on that, one side of the spectrum or the other, you're told you're normal, even if you're creeping towards one side or the other. So we want to really elucidate, are you heading in the direction of pathology? You may never even get there, but we know that the symptoms are there and that we can start basically putting the car in reverse and going backwards, which is analogous to healing. So with this person's test that you talked to me about pre-show, I think they got a serum-based cortisol test. Is that correct?
Exactly.
So your typical endocrinologist is using serum-based cortisol to look at adrenal function from a Addison's or Cushing's perspective, right? Cushing's, think push. Cortisol is pushed up high, push. And Addison's disease is adrenal failure, where cortisol is really, really low. So they're looking for super, super high cortisol, typically driven by a lot of times a pituitary tumor sometimes, right? Or a adrenal tumor. And number two, they're looking for adrenal failure. And then a lot of times they'll give you a ACTH stimulation test where they give you some compound that stimulates the adrenals to make a whole bunch of cortisol. And if the cortisol from the adrenals doesn't double or increase significantly, then the adrenal gland, something's wrong with it, right? And that's where Addison's comes into play. That's the ultimate adrenal failure. Now, if you're working with us or you're working with functional medicine doctors, you probably heard this word adrenal fatigue before. Now, we're not talking about Addison's or Cushing's here, so I just want to make sure we're on the same page. We're talking about a functional imbalance that exists in between these two spectrums, which conventional medicine, your conventional endocrinologist ignores, is the adrenal dysfunction. And I'm using the word adrenal dysfunction more than fatigue because, well, fatigue kind of gives you that, it feels like failure, right? I'm fatigued, I'm failure. It's we're working to fatigue, working to failure if we're in the gym, right? And it's not quite the same thing. So dysfunction is great because dysfunction does a couple of things. It looks at the cortisol rhythm, for instance. So if we're just doing that sample cortisol serum test, that's not really giving us the information we want about the adrenals because we don't have the rhythm aspect to it. Just going to get your blood drawn by itself is a stressor, which could increase cortisol. So maybe that cortisol is a lot better than what it would be because that needle created a stress response, i.e. increased the cortisol. And then number 3 is we're not looking at that cortisol throughout the day. We don't have a morning, noon, afternoon, nighttime level just because of the fact that just getting pricked 4 times a day would be really difficult and tough, and that would alter the test just by itself. So we're missing those couple of pieces. And also, when we're looking at saliva-based testing, we're looking at free fraction, meaning a serum-based test is looking at 100% of the hormone coming out of the gland, where saliva is looking at 2% of what's biologically free, meaning what's not bound up by protein, whether it's albumin or globulin. So 2% of the hormones free, saliva looks at that. Blood, for the most part, unless it says serum free, it's going to be looking at 100% of the hormone. And that's helpful when you're looking at glandular dysfunction from a disease or cancer-based perspective, not helpful when you're looking at functional, because it's the free fraction that can bind to the receptor site, and hormones work like a lock and key. The key has to go into the lock for it to work. Same like the free fraction of the hormone that has to go into the hormonal receptor site, dock, and then create that metabolic, anabolic, or anti-inflammatory effect, whether we're talking about testosterone, progesterone, estrogen, or cortisol.
Yeah, and so this guy, he couldn't put a finger on why he was feeling so exhausted noon and afternoon. So he goes in the morning and gets this cortisol measure done with his blood, and he's told he's fine. But once we actually run this functional adrenal profile on him and see how tanked out he truly is, his noon level was equivalent to my midnight level. And I've tested myself, and you and I both are always running tests on ourselves just to make sure we're staying in the right place. He had, I think it was 0.7 units of output for noon, which
It's terrible.
That's even less than you would normally output at midnight. And I told this guy, I said, man, I'm honestly not surprised based on this reading here that you are able to continue working and you don't have to just go home and take a nap with this rate.
Exactly. And most people that have energy issues and they're going to see their doctor or their endocrinologist, they're primarily looking at 2 things. Maybe adrenals. Maybe they'll run that serum-based cortisol, and if that cortisol is low, they may do an ACTH stim test. Or number 2, they may just run a simple TSH. That's a thyroid stimulating hormone test, and they'll look at how high their pituitary is talking to their thyroid. Right, the higher it is, right, that means the lower the thyroid's outputting or their output is. So it's kind of an opposite thing. High TSH means low thyroid. Now that's important because once that's ruled out, let's say your TSH is 4. In functional medicine world, that's pretty darn high. Anything above 3, we start getting concerned. Let's say their cortisol is fine. Well, you're totally ruled out now for any fatigue issues. You're going to be told just go along your merry way. You're just getting older, or here's some stimulant medication, or they're going to say it's all in your head if you just keep coming back. So in our functional world here, we're looking at thyroid, a full spectrum test that involves free fraction, not just TSH. And we're also going to be looking at cortisol from a free fraction as well, but we're going to be looking at the rhythm component. And also, we're going to be looking at DHEA, because DHEA sulfate, which is made from the adrenal glands, that's another indication of adrenal dysfunction. So if DHEA is starting to drop, which in a lot of people it does. Now, DHEA is this precursor hormone to a lot of our anabolic hormones. So it'll be a precursor to estrogen in a lot of females and more testosterone in males. And the older we get, the more we rely on DHEA from our adrenals to kind of give us that anabolic push. Now, that's typically never looked at in a conventional setting, because what are you going to do with that information? So we look at it as well, and that gives us a great informative kind of background on what's happening with the adrenals, above and beyond cortisol serum. And also in conjunction with that free fraction, we're looking at the rhythm of the cortisol. And then we're also looking at the thyroid, not just TSH, but the whole entire domino lineup, meaning TSH, the T4 free in total, T3 free in total, T3 uptake, reverse T3, and antibodies. So we have the trifecta going. And if we keep this fatigue pattern going, we also want to look at the mitochondria, which we'll probably talk about that in a separate podcast. I think we already have, but the mitochondria is a really important piece of the puzzle, because B vitamins and certain metabolic Krebs cycle nutrients are important for fatigue as well. And a lot of my patients may have decent mitochondria, or decent adrenals and decent thyroid, but it's their mitochondria that really is weak. And when we start supporting that with nutrition and we fix the gut issues, it's amazing how fatigue gets better and better.
Yeah, so to add to this whole loop, we'll use the same guy as the example. His DHEA level was actually pretty good. He was at like a 7.5, which
good.
was, yeah.
It's really good.
And well, that's what I thought at first. And he goes, oh, and I forgot to put on my supplement on my new client paperwork that I've been taking 50 milligrams of DHEA because I read an article a couple years ago about how good it was for you. So I've been basically self-treating with DHEA.
Oh, forget it. So he's automatically adrenally fatigued. If he's at 50 milligrams and he's coming up normal or in the, in a good range, that means without it, he doesn't have a leg to stand on.
Mm-hmm. Because that's what I was kind of, and I want to break this down a little bit further with you. That's what I was mind blown about because, I see such a low cortisol sum. I mean, like I said, his noon level, he was tanked out on this graph, and I couldn't really picture what was keeping him afloat. And then we say, okay, so DHA looks okay. And then he tells me that. And I mean, if he were to just go cold turkey on that, he'd probably be in bed rest. What do you think?
Absolutely. And also, I think his DHEA was probably artificially lowering his cortisol. DHEA biochemically, given without cortisol support, can actually lower cortisol. So the fact that he was doing 50 milligrams, which is pretty darn high for a guy, by the way. I mean, I like giving much smaller doses, but especially the lower your cortisol is, you actually have to be careful with DHEA because DHEA and cortisol have this seesaw relationship. So if cortisol is lower and DHEA is low, you actually want to give a lower amount of DHEA just because of the fact you'll push cortisol even lower, which is what I hypothesize happened in this patient's case.
Yeah, so it's amazing. And it makes me really wonder, and I don't know what your estimate is, how many people are out there doing this self-treating model. They're not working with somebody that is actually using functional lab testing. And it's kind of scary because there's so many people out there, and we've discussed this before, about theory, people talking about theory. And then in isolation, this thing, DHEA, it protects you, it's good for you, blah, blah, blah. And everybody goes willy-nilly taking it. And that's not the way to do it. And now he's on for a long journey. And by the way, he's 28 years old.
Wow.
With this type. I mean, this is worse than I've seen some guy that is 65 years old. I mean, he's got a worse rhythm, worse output than somebody 40 years older. It's mind-blowing.
And DHEA and any hormone in general needs to be given ideally at the lowest physiological level possible. When you go too high, the problem with hormones is too high of a hormone level can actually create the same symptoms of low hormones, which is kind of weird. It's like wrap your head around that, but we have something known as receptor site downregulation, where the receptor sites where hormones dock actually become numb to the hormone itself. So even if a lot of hormones there, it can actually feel like there's very little there because the receptor sites become numb to the hormone, because hormones are present in the body at very, very small levels. I mean, these things are measured in like picograms or nanograms, which is like to the billionth and millionth level. So, I mean, very, very sensitive things. So we want to treat hormones with the utmost respect. It's not like taking vitamin C. Oh, I take 1 gram or 3 grams or 5 grams. Who cares, right? Hormones, it's different. We got to be very, very careful and use them at the very smallest levels possible, ideally. And trying to use them sublingual is a better way to go just to maximize absorption. If we just give things orally, we tend to have to give 3 to 4 times a higher dose of that hormone because a lot of it gets deactivated by the liver. So when you're trying to give hormones via a pill that you swallow, you got to go 3 to 4 times higher because the liver is kind of deactivating things as you put the hormone in your body.
Makes sense. I mean, could you even call this sort of like how insulin resistance is when you're constantly creating these blood sugar spikes and crashes? I mean, would you almost call that hormone resistance, or almost like if you were adding in too much GABA, for example, and you cause a down regulation of those production there? Is that similar to what's going on with DHEA?
Yeah, it's very, very similar. And many patients have this that are using hormones supplementally because they just treat hormones like it's a nutrient, and it's okay if I give a little bit more of something. But we got to be careful with hormones. And, not to mention, you can give a hormone to the cow that comes home, but if the diet piece isn't addressed, the lifestyle piece isn't addressed, or there's an underlying gut or malabsorption thing, then you're just going to be, addressing icing on the cake, right? You're going to be just re-icing the cake of a cake that's all moldy underneath, right? We actually want to fix the underlying issue, which would be, the actual foundation of that cake, or in our body, our gut and infections and immune and nutrient absorption, not just given some hormones. And a lot of the anti-aging doctors I find are the most guilty of this.
Of what?
Of just using hormones like supplements and just getting a palliative effect, meaning, great, you feel better, awesome, and now you're done. And we're not going to go any deeper.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, that's something that you and I will do, is to help with symptoms. Say if they are fatigue, we'll help get their energy better. But eventually we've got to work backwards far enough, or deep enough rather, to get to what's causing it. I mean, it's tough to tell somebody, hey, look, we have to eliminate your gut infection. Maybe we can't go straight there, but we'll help you feel better first, so that you actually have the motivation to get going to that. And I totally agree with you that most people, they get cut short, and they have all these puzzle pieces. I like to use the puzzle analogy, where it's like they're shuffling all these puzzle pieces on top of the table, but they're still missing some from the drawer that's 4 drawers down, and they don't ever pull that piece out, and that's why their puzzle's never complete, and they're always going to have some type of lingering symptom or issue.
Absolutely. So looking at this person's test here, just remember, blood test, typically, if it's a hormone, it's always going to be serum-based, and that's going to look at 100% of the hormone. It's ignoring the 2%. So if you get the free portion of it, we can do it via saliva. Some tests, we can do it via blood as well. We can order an estradiol free. I don't think you can do a progesterone free via blood, so you have to do that via saliva. We can order thyroid free, right? T4 thyroxine free. We can order T3 free. So we can do that via saliva. We can do testosterone total and free, which is nice. So we have, a lot of latitude with some of the blood testing. And also when we look at blood tests, we're looking at it differently. I mean, the high and low ranges basically are 2.5% of the population, high and low, which we know 95% isn't normal. So we're looking at these lab tests functionally speaking, which is really important, because we want people to be in that middle 30% or so. And if you start creeping outside of that, it can mean something where conventional doctor, they just look at it, make sure nothing's flagged, which would potentially indicate pathology or something more severe. It depends. When we're looking at cholesterol, it's not the case. That's another podcast. We'll have to talk about that later. Cholesterol is actually one of these markers that's more overly sensitive. And it's because we're not looking at other things like inflammation and particle size and those things. But for the most part, blood tests are going to miss a lot of things if you're not looking at it with a functional medicine eye to it.
Totally. That's a great point.
Anything you want to add, Evan?
No, I mean, this was good. I don't know if I have much more to say about this topic. I think we've crushed it.
All right. Well, great podcast. Take home is just understand kind of what your blood tests you're looking at. If you're getting hormones done, look at free, look at total fraction or serum, fraction as well. And then make sure you have a complete picture, right? Know what the MD is looking at, which is disease and pathology, and then know what the functional medicine doctor is looking at. They're looking at functional imbalances. If you get that, then you have the right take-home message.
Yeah, and I guess I would add one last thing here. My goal and your goal is not to instill fear and say that if you have, say, some blood work that looks like it's perfect, not to be paranoid and think that I'm not perfect now because of this podcast, but that you do want to reach out to one of us or reach out to someone that knows how to look at this stuff from the functional perspective. That way you're getting a little bit more help, because my grandfather, for example, I mean, he's gone year after year after year, and he gets a perfect bill of health on his blood work. But once I go over there and put the magnifying glass to it, it's like, wow, look at this. According to here and here and here, you're super dehydrated. There's inflammation here. And it's like, no, you're not perfect, Bill. We need to dial some things in together. And that's a totally realistic goal, and it's a fun process to do, and there's so much more potential that you can have. So don't ever sell yourself short and just say it's good enough. Be happy with where you are, but there's always one little higher bar of where you can likely feel and be with your energy, your sleep, the way you look, your sex drive. I mean, everything. There's so much more potential out there for you.
Well, most patients that I see, they already have symptoms. They gotten this testing done. They go to their MD because, well, they're in their network. Why not? And then they're looking for answers, and then their MD says, you're fine. And then they're like, but I know I'm not. Like, I felt this slow degradation over the last couple of years. Something's not right. And then they push it. They come back again. They go to someone else in their network. The other doctor sees the notes and they're like, yeah, you're fine. I think this is all in your head. And then once that hits, or once they're thrown an antidepressant or some kind of medication that's just palliative and just covering up symptoms, and they know about it, then they're BS. And then they're like, man, I got to go see someone else. And then once we do the functional testing, it's a relief once they find a bug, or they see some nutrients off, or we find their diets off, or we find something is wrong, and then we fix it and they start feeling better. It's like, wow. So that's total freedom when we get to the root and then they see improvement versus, hey, when you tell someone they're making something up and they have no reason to make it up, because people that are spending money on food and really being conscious of things, they're not making things up. That's not how it works, right? There's always something deeper there, and people intuitively know it. And they don't need a lab test a lot of times to even say something's wrong.
Exactly. I totally agree. And I think that's what helps you and I sleep good at night, is because once you help somebody to find that answer or to find that piece of the puzzle that was never looked at deep enough, it's like, oh my God, I'm finally heard. I'm finally getting an explanation that makes sense of why this is happening. I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't identify what it was. And then we just use a different set of tools, and now there's an answer. And oh gosh, does that feel good.
Love it. Love it, Evan. Great. Any other closing comments?
That's it.
Evan, great podcast today, man.
Likewise. I agree.
Care.
All right. See ya. Bye.
Bye.
Got a question for Dr. J? Go to BeyondWellnessRadio.com and click the questions button. Then tune in to hear the answer. Also, if you like the show, click below to review us on iTunes. For more Beyond Wellness Radio, go to BeyondWellnessRadio.com.